Back in 2016, the election of Donald Trump was a radicalizing moment for many women in America and across the world. An open misogynist beating Hillary Clinton, the first female nominee of any major party, even after the Access Hollywood tape leaked, brought about a global movement through the sheer force of women's rage and what they had been asked to endure.
They descended on the Capitol and cities around the world by the hundreds of thousands. Far more people marching for women's rights on President Trump's first full day in office than attended his inauguration. Tens of thousands more marching in Chicago, Boston, and Seattle. And overseas in England, Italy, Germany, and Paris. Crowds of mostly women, all protesting President Trump.
Trump era also gave us, just a few months actually after those marches, the Me Too movement. Another massive cultural shift led by women who were tired of men like Donald Trump, just one example, but many, many, many others, mistreating and abusing women with seemingly total impunity. Now, nearly 8 years later, Donald Trump is heading back to the White House after running, I think it's fair to say, the most misogynistic campaign I've ever seen. He took credit for tearing reproductive rights away from millions of women. He was found civilly liable for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll and continued to defame her. He picked a running mate who railed against childless cat ladies. Trump won the election regardless. And the misogynistic trolls feel even more emboldened than ever before.
I'm just a girl standing in front of the world asking for a president who isn't a rapist. Request denied!
The feel when we control your bodies. Hey, bitch, we control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again, okay? Men win again. And yes, we control your bodies. Hi, I'm your Republican congressman. Hi, I'm your Republican congressman. It's your body, my choice.
Disgusting comments like that are going viral. They're setting the groundwork for a massive backlash. But one lesson nobody learned from Trump the first time around was that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The action was Trump's ascendancy, and the reaction was a global movement centering women's righteous anger. We are already seeing the ripples of another movement based on that anger, and I am predicting we are going to get a bigger reaction than 2017 this time around. It is just a question of when, where, and how. Donald Trump's third bid for the White House was arguably his most misogynistic yet, and his supporters heard the message loud and clear. Even on election night, before the race was called for Trump, the sort of white supremacist, Nazi-friendly troll and Mar-a-Lago dinner guest Nick Fuentes tweeted, quote, "Your body, my choice forever." What we're seeing now is a backlash to that rank misogyny. In tweets and videos all over social media, women are pushing back against the Trump supporters who want to undo decades of progress on women's rights. Now the question is if and when that rage will boil over into something like we saw back in 2017 when millions of women took to the streets to send a clear message to Donald Trump. Michelle Goldberg is an opinion columnist at the New York Times, where she writes, "This is who we are now." Heather McGhee, longtime progressive strategist, author of the best-selling book, The Sum of Us, and they join me now. How you guys doing?
We're hanging in there. We are hanging in there.
I really think that there's going to be echoes and rhymes, but not repetition.
Yeah.
Second time around.
Yep.
So what do you think? What do you think is happening?
So I think, when Donald Trump won the first time, it was such a profound shock. And it also felt like kind of a fluke or an accident,
yes,
which is part of what propelled so many women onto the street. That is not the case this time. I mean, both because there was reason to see it coming, there was, it's no longer improbable, and also he won the popular vote, right? So there isn't this same sense of democratic illegitimacy. And yet, of course, women are both outraged and I think many rightly terrified. For now, I think there's something of a pulling back. And also I believe, and I think you're already seeing seeds of this, there was already intense alienation between young men and young women in this country, right? That's part of the kind of seed of this broader social crisis.
Totally.
And anyone who thought that Donald Trump's election was going to do anything but exacerbate that is in for a rude shock.
Yeah. I think that we have to also zoom back and think about where this is all coming from beyond Donald Trump, right? I always like to think about who is selling these racist and sexist ideas for their own profit. in addition to who's desperate enough to buy them, right? And who's selling them is an entire ecosystem, an information ecosystem, from the video games, the podcasters, the sports betting influencers. It's a whole world that if you're not in it, you really don't know who these people are, that make up the living, breathing culture of so many young men in this society. And they are doing it for profit, right? And then you've got the social media, which now, of course, is owned, in part by Elon Musk, who not only is going to continue to do what social media just does as its own, which is really subsidize and manipulate so that the most outrageous things become the most profitable things for them. But he believes these things himself. He's, in fact, like a huge avatar of this misogyny and this racism and this greed. And so I just think we need to really recognize that everything we believe comes from a story we've been told.
Yes, it's a great
And
point.
these people...
They don't just exist.
They don't just exist, right? There are material conditions, right? There's
Yes.
like women advancing in society. There's
Yes.
all these things,
Yes.
right? But it's also true that the meaning making about the material
yes.
conditions is completely owned right now by the right wing. And that's our problem and our responsibility to fix.
I got to say this. I have 3 kids. I have a daughter, son, daughter. My son is... I don't talk about my kids a lot on the show, but I will just for a moment. I love my kids. They're totally incredible. I think the universe of them. And my son is just an incredibly sweet and emotionally intelligent kid. And one of the things I worry about, I worry a lot of things about my daughters. But one of the biggest things I worry about for my son is the poison, the absolute poison being pumped into the brains of boys. Yeah. Boys. These are, these are children forming that is this rank misogyny. It's so disgusting. It's so pervasive. I think people that aren't, I see it partly because I like to look at a lot of weightlifting videos and the algorithm is just oh, you like to weightlift. Here's all this horrible stuff. And it's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's a problem that is going to get worse. I mean, it will culturally get worse, but it will also just get worse in terms of any attempt at regulation, right? Because that's part of what Elon Musk bought with his massive contributions to Donald Trump, right? So they've decided that any attempts to regulate social media is, kind of de facto censorship, and so they get to just, pump this stuff into our kids' feeds relentlessly.
I mean, I think there's also ways to think about alternatives.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Making other meaning. I mean, this is the thing that I really am thinking a lot about recently is making meaning for young people, whatever their gender identity is, about who they are in the world that isn't just reactionary and bad.
Listen, I think liberals have gone behind the paywall, right? And if you look at news media and media in general, right, you've got the loss of the local newspaper, right? 70% of newspapers, right? We've got more than half of counties have no local news anymore, right? You've got Sinclair, reaching 70%. It's a right-wing local broadcaster for news, reaching 70% of households. So you've lost all of this local news that used to just have a flavor of humanity to it and localism in favor of this sort of national zero-sum, fully within the propaganda kind of strategy. And so in that vacuum, and then you've got, I think it's around 70% of, kind of good journalism is behind a paywall, right? And so you're having this education-based gap in what people have access to in information. And that is, I think, the sort of table stakes for how we got to this place.
In terms of these sort of reaction, which is the thing I keep thinking about, having lived through a bunch of cycles where it's I woke up on the morning after the last Republican president won a national popular majority, George W. Bush, just being well, we're cooked. He's a colossus. And then it was things changed real quick.
Right, and you remember, it's I've got political capital, and I'm going to spend it, and it lasted a few months.
You're right, because he tried to privatize Social Security, he got his butt kicked. But in terms of this action reaction, that, there's this 4B movement that has been propping up. And I've been seeing this, which I also think is 100% understandable, but also is part of the social media negative polarization churn. Explain 4B.
Right, so 4B, I mean, It's a South Korean movement. In South Korea, if you want to look at kind of, not necessarily a worst case scenario, but a scary scenario for where this goes, where women and men are so far apart, where they have an anti-feminist troll as the leader of the country. And part of how women have reacted to this rampant misogyny is just to withdraw. So 4B movement is just to basically give up men, give up family, give up babies, focus on your career, focus on your own stability. And the thing is, women are doing better already in terms of education, in terms of their career prospects. And there was, I think, until there was an understanding that that was something we kind of had to address the pain of young men. It's hard to see how you do that when young men are, rubbing their hands and trying to kind of, put their red-hatted, kind of, planning to grind their boot into the neck of these women. So I think what you'll see is kind of more, because you talk about the media that men are consuming, but women are also consuming their own media on TikTok, their own podcasts, which is telling them basically that you need to stay away from men who voted for Donald Trump.
And to your point about like the environment we're all like in is like one where there's like a few small corporations that basically profit off of the attention that's created by this conflict.
Exactly. And meanwhile, policy's being made and we're just,
policy, which was, we tried here in our little corner to talk about policy all the time. We really did.
Yes, I know.
Just totally absent from the campaign.
Yeah.
Just like no one knows what anyone
And one of the things that the right is driven by are falling birth rates. I mean, if you look at South Korea, you're talking about, you have seen nothing yet.
And yes, mutual alienation is not going to help that. Michelle Goldberg and Heather McGhee, thank you both.